Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of A Real Point of View. I'm your host, Greg Morgan, and joining me is my co host and one of my uh, better friends. Today is my co host, movie maven herself, Miss Karen D. How you doing, Karen?
I think I just got demoted, but other than that, I'm doing great.
Karen was not supposed to know we're siblings. See, that was the whole premise. But that's neither. It's gone now. It's done. We're siblings. Everyone knows now. The whole earth knows. Say, oh, it's your best friend. Oh, that's cool. Well, can't do that. It's my sister. Ding, 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 ding. So how you doing, sis?
Oh, doing good. How about you, Greg?
I'm hanging in there. Been a rough week, but that's okay. Living through it, surviving it, praising God for it, thanking Him for every single moment, every day. But we're here to talk movies, are we? Are we not?
We are.
All right.
We certainly
Well,
are.
this was your theme with the Olympics going on. We thought, hey, this might be a good idea. So, what made you think that this would be a good idea, Karen? What was the driving force?
Well, for me, I've always kind of been an Olympics aficionado. Even as a small child, I remember just being glued to the television when the Olympics came on.
Mhm.
And that was, for me, that was must-see television. And it's still that way today. I mean, in some ways, I don't get quite as caught up in it as I used to. It depends, because I think in some ways television has sort of taken a little bit of the joy out of the Olympics.
Mhm.
There's so much money that gets caught up in that, and in my view, for the media companies that vie to show the Olympics, there's so much concern over the money, the advertising, the deals that have to get made, that the thing that drives the Olympics, the love of athleticism, the love of sport, the thrill of competition, and the goodwill that comes from competing in a fair manner against other people, other similarly talented athletes from other countries. To me, that kind of gets lost these days. It's like this huge media juggernaut, and sort of the Kickstarter to the fall television season. Oh, this will be a great lead-in for our fall television programs. This is our opportunity to show, these ads or these promos, or it's like, so that bothers me a little bit, but I still love the idea of the Olympics. During the Winter Olympics, I will be glued to the television to watch ice skating, which is my all-time favorite sport, but I also really like skiing. And in the Summer Olympics,
Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, there's a slight delay. Go ahead. What were we saying here? Hey, Karen, can you hear me? Well, while Karen's coming back into the system here, just give you some ideas about the Olympics for me. Growing up, as Karen alluded to, we saw a lot of the Olympics. We watched them pretty devoutly and every year, and it was a really good time for family gatherings as well, along with just the wonderful essence of individual effort. Um, uh, I participated in track and field in high school and college, and it was a wonderful feeling, a wonderful time, and a lot of camaraderie, along with the athleticism and the competition. And I too love the Olympic competition. Watched it um, up until probably not too recent past. I too, not real big fan of the commercialism, but I know without it, we wouldn't be able to see it. Sponsors do help make this possible, but at the same time, um, sometimes the great efforts and the individual prowess of these wonderful athletes gets lost. So one of the reasons we're doing this, I guess, is to give a kind of a minimal homage to Olympic sport and in film. We've had there's probably a myriad of films out there that talk about different aspects of sports and even the Olympics more directly. We chose a few films to kind of discuss in our conversation today. Um, and these films are actually chosen by you, Karen. So why don't you kind of give our listeners and viewers an idea as to why you can pick these films?
Okay, hopefully I had some technical difficulties there and my feed dropped. So hopefully
Don't worry.
that won't happen again. Um, um, Actually, the inspiration for picking these films was an article that I happened to read in New Republic that basically said, hey, it's the Olympics, and here are 5 films that sort of profile the Olympic experience. So certainly over the years, there have been more than 5 films that have talked about the Olympic experience. But I think what I liked about this article was that it brought up films that were made recently, as well as films that have been made a while back, films that may have been forgotten. And I like the idea of just sort of celebrating the Olympics because, as I was saying before we had our technical difficulties, I really enjoy watching the Olympics. And I've been bleary-eyed this entire week from,
Again, having technical difficulties. We apologize for that, ladies and gentlemen. Go ahead, Carrie.
oh,
Very
um,
eyed. Very eyed.
I've been bleary-eyed from staying up at night watching the Olympics. It happened last night because I had to watch what happened with Simone Biles and her quest to win an all-around medal. And I wanted to watch the swimming, and and then I watched it again at 3 o'clock in the morning. So yes, I'm very committed.
It can be addictive, and I guess that's what's happening all across the world, not just America, but the world.
Exactly. So that was really the inspiration for picking these 3 films. Now, why these as opposed to others? I liked these because they hit different points in time. The first film that we're going to talk about was made in 1981, but it focuses on the 1924 Olympic Games that were held in Paris, France. Our second film was made actually in 2015, so very, very recent film, but it focuses on the 1936 Olympic Games that were held in Berlin, Germany, during the ascendancy of the Nazi regime and Hitler's rise to power.
1936.
And then our third film was made in 1997, and it focused on the 1972 Olympics. So, different points of time and different issues that arose during each of those times.
Very cool. So the first film, Karen, is Chariots of Fire, right?
Right.
So as you alluded to, this movie was made in 1981. Highly rated film. Seemed like it was watched by quite a few people back then. It was a movie that I did see back then. I've seen it recent past. I won't say that I've seen it in the last few weeks or so, unfortunately, but really good actors in it. One of my favorite actors is in this particular film, and that's Ben Cross, who plays Harold Abrams in this film. He's a very pivotal part of the movie. So kind of give our viewers an understanding as to what's really going on here in this film. This one's more about religious aspects, right?
Right. But I think this film is kind of the pure, it's probably one of the purest films that I can recall dealing with the Olympic experience from the standpoint of love of sport, not for monetary gain, but for simply for the love of competition. And it's really, I think what's really interesting is just this film focuses on Great Britain, and these elite athletes were running for merry old England in the 1924 Paris Games. And you'll notice here that that the focus was on these men who were going to Oxford. I think it was Oxford or Cambridge. But anyway, to get into a school like that, you had to not only have extremely high grades, you had to be born, you had to be well bred. You had to be all of these men, most of these men who competed in the 1924 Olympic Games that were profiled in this film came from very wealthy families. And so they sort of had the luxury of being able to compete while they were in school and to focus on their training and not have to worry about sponsorships or where their next meals were coming from. And they didn't have, a lot of them didn't have those worries. Now, that's not true for all of them. Eric Liddell, who is one of the athletes who's profiled in this movie, did come from a much poorer background. And in fact, he was a missionary. And one of the other themes in this film has to do with religion. Harold Abrahams, who's played by Ben Cross, is Jewish. And there were a number of references in the movie, disparaging references made by his professors and by some people that he went to school with, and just strangers or people who worked at the school or whatever, who just looked down on him because he was Jewish. And they would, like, there's a line where Sir John Gielgud plays one of the professors in the movie, and he says something like, well, his father's a financier. And he just says this in a very disparaging way. And it sort of brings up visions of like The Merchant of Venice from Shakespeare, where you have this, this real stereotype of this Jewish man who comes from a family, and they don't really come by their wealth honestly through family and blood. They come through, they get their wealth by, I don't know, lending money. Ew, that's so disgusting. How could you, and they're making money for the sake of money. They really seem to like money, and that's really, that's so crappy. And then they're really good at it, and that's really annoying. So you have that sort of undercurrent. So that's for Harold Abrahams. Eric Liddell, on the other hand, like I said, he came from a family of missionaries, and they were extremely devoted to doing their missionary work. And the other theme in the movie was whether Eric Liddell would allow being distracted by the Olympics to get in the way of his missionary work, which was the ultimate, his primary purpose. And his sister, he and his sister were very close, and they did missionary work together. And his sister would say things like, I don't want anything getting in the way of this work. And then Eric Liddell, or people around Eric Liddell, would say, but, he runs like the wind. He's got this God-given talent. Does he use his God-given talent to run, or does he suppress his God-given talent for a greater glory, which is to work in the missionary? So those are things that
even Eric himself, he felt that this was his gift, and that the best way for him to give God honor would be to run.
Right.
And so he himself was convinced that this was part of his mission, part of his innate ability was given by God to do just that, run like the wind, and be
Yes.
this person.
Yes.
And ironically, during the Olympic Games in this particular film, there is a conflict for Eric because he's such a devout Christian that one of the preliminary competitions was going to happen on Sunday, on the
Right,
Sabbath.
on the Sabbath.
And he was thinking, well, I'm not going to do it. And so now the coaches in the country, even some of the dignitaries in England are like, dude, you've got to run. I mean, that's why you're there. And it's like, but yet, hey, it's on the Sabbath. I can't do it.
Yes.
I refuse to do it.
Right. And he did not do it.
No, but we don't want to give the whole movie away, but, something happens to where, he still is able to compete, fortunately. And
no, it didn't.
Yeah, it does.
Well, in the movie it does, but that's not what happened in real life.
Oh, I didn't know we were going jumping. I thought a real point of view, like movies. I thought we were talking about movies. Yeah, they were actually from Cambridge, and actually in real life, one of the guys who's basically narrating this story through letters, he actually was listed as a friend of theirs from Cambridge, but he was the only one that actually went to Oxford. But anyway, that's neither here nor there, I guess. I don't know. But about the movie, in the movie, I guess I'm going to spoil it. I'm going to be a spoiler. I'm not usually a spoiler. I'm going to be a spoiler. Someone helps him by giving him an opportunity to compete in a different event on a different day, like a Thursday.
Monday,
Thursday. He's able to compete. And now they're thinking, well, hey, he's in a different event. He's not going to do well. And he gets the gold.
So, right. Oh, my goodness. You did spoil it.
Just had to, because we were going real life, not real life.
Well, this does really dovetail very closely to real life. Which and I will say, since we are talking about the movie, this movie is very well done. And you've heard me say this a million times, but I remember when this movie came out, I went to see this in the theater.
What?
And I told all of my friends this movie's going to win the Academy Award for Best Picture, which it did. It also sort of created like new pathways in terms of music for movies. Vangelis became like this huge sensation because that electronic sort of electronic acoustic type music was something that really hadn't been used to great effect in movies before this movie came out. And it caused quite a sensation. And usually you don't notice the music in movies, and you're not supposed to, but this music matched the movie so well. And that image of these men in the prime of their lives running along the seashore in their bare feet, because that's what people did back in those days, with this music that just kind of evoked the wind, the flying and soaring, and it was great. It was a wonderful marriage of music and movie.
And music's very important in movies. It always has been. And it sets the mood and the tone. And in this particular film, it does that. There's something about the music and them running on the beach. In normal life, you wouldn't really pay as much attention necessarily. Some attention, but not as much attention. But somehow you understood what they were going through because of how the music was utilized in this film. And it's really interesting. And then, years and years and years and years later, that music is still utilized. And maybe not, I haven't heard it so much recently, but in the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s, you would always hear the song. And it is soothing music, too.
Yes. And the other thing that I want to mention that was an undercurrent, it was just alluded to in the beginning of the film, but the other thing that was at stake in 1924, the other thing that I guess we need to keep in mind was that Europe was just coming out of the shadow of World War I.
Correct.
So the 1920, there were a number of athletes who were looking to compete in 1920 who instead needed to become soldiers in Surrey. So they didn't get to compete, or they were killed, or injured or killed. And in any event, 1924 was not an option for them. So there was some immediacy to 1924, and that, especially in Great Britain and in France too, because it's like, we lost this huge opportunity because we were engaged in World War One. Now we have to get back on track. We have to give our athletes a chance to compete now in 1924, to make up for, and in some ways to make up for what happened in 1920.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue actually into the next film, which was made recently in 2015, 2016, which is Race, which deals with the life and situation regarding the 1936 Olympics, when Hitler was in power. And this is pre-World War II. So we go from World War One, the end of World War One, into just prior to World War II, in 1936. And this is Jesse Owens, and his journey, we'll say, into the 1936 Olympics. And Nazi Germany was the host country for these Olympics. And Hitler was very much present during this time, at the Olympics. Now, you mentioned, Karen, about some of the athletes prior to that, in the 1920s. A lot of them had to go to war, or had been to war, or were already in the service. In this film, I found that there was a sprinter who Jesse Owens had befriended, and that's Carl Lutz Long, who, despite what Nazi Germany, who didn't like pretty much anybody but people in Germany, they did not think that it was a good idea that this Aryan would befriend this African American from the United States, and yet they had a very good kinship, that's introduced in the film. And historically, sadly, because of it, Carl Lutz was forced into the army and sent to the front,
and
where he
killed.
Died. It's a pretty sad situation, but Jesse Owens' journey, we go from the United States, where, very definitely not middle class at all, lower class, trying to better himself, and a very educated young man. At the time of this particular film, Jesse Owens is going to college at the Ohio State University. And his coach is a former sprinter who, because of injury, wasn't able to actually get to the Olympics himself. And so he was very, very driven coach, and he saw the talent of some of the athletes at Ohio State, and he did it the best he could to try to get them ready for not just the collegiate, but the international competition. So what about this movie that did you like? What is it about this movie that made you include it in the trio here?
Well, I have to say, I didn't like this movie as much as I thought I was going to. Let me just draw a comparison for a quick second, because Chariots of Fire, I think, is a very well done movie. It's really well acted, and it's, a number of these actors are not incredibly well known on this side of the pond, except for perhaps Sir John Gielgud, who didn't have that larger role. But Ben Cross became, sort of like the big man for a while, and then kind of faded into obscurity after that. Ian Charleston never, he's done movies. He probably continues to act, but he didn't become a big star as far as American audiences were concerned. But these are really, they're excellent actors. And the story is one that has a lot of poignancy. It's very moving. And it kind of glorifies the Olympics and the spirit in which the Olympics were actually created. So there's that. Then there's race. And I guess maybe I wanted too much from this movie. I'm not sure. But I think we need a compelling movie about Jesse Owens' experiences competing as an athlete in Nazi Germany, but maybe it's just too big or too overwhelming for a director to wrap his or her hands around, or maybe the right director hasn't gotten their hands on this story yet. There've been a number of stories over the years about Jesse Owens competing, one of them starring Jesse Owens himself, actually, and it was absolutely horrible. So there was that. And there've been, other movies, or some made for TV and whatever, but nothing at all compelling. And when this movie was announced and I saw the trailers, it's like, okay, finally, someone's going to make a movie that Jesse Owens deserves, because he's so incredible. He did so much for this country and took so much on himself to do that, to accomplish the things that he accomplished. He deserves an amazing movie. He deserves an Academy Award-winning, wide release, bigger than life movie. I've yet to see that movie, and unfortunately for me, race isn't it. It's an okay movie, but for me, maybe it comes down to the script. Maybe it comes down to just, in some of the ways that the director chose to convey the story. It's not as compelling as it should be. And I'm really disappointed about that. What did you think?
After seeing Stephen James in Selma and seeing him in some other roles in movies of lesser ilk, he did a really good job. And I don't think he did a bad job in this film. I think, like you say, Karen, there's something about the film that seems, for lack of a better way of saying it, watered down a little bit. Not as you alluded to, compelling, but also not as in-depth as I think we would have liked. A little more detail, a little bit more from the character being, or from the actors being, who are portraying these real life people. And maybe it could be very much the screenplay wasn't quite as good as one would hope. Even with the good people that are in it, William Hurt, Jeremy Irons, there's a notable people in this movie, as well as actors who are not as known in this film, and yet it didn't help.
No.
There were certain points in the film that might have had some type of strength to them, but the movie as a whole, not so much. But it did bring up different situations. It did bring up different elements that occurred during the time that this was taking place. But, this is going to sound bad. You would think with more of a budget that they would be able to do more. And it felt more like a made for TV movie than it did as a theatrical release. I
agree with you. Yeah. I agree with you. It did feel more, I hadn't thought of putting it that way, but I think you're right. It did feel more like it. It was almost like they were afraid of inciting too too much passion if they told what really happened. So they walk right up to the ledge and then they back off, and they go up to the ledge again and then they back off. I mean,
Which,
frankly, the friendship or the camaraderie, the alliance that developed between Jesse Owens and the German runner that you just mentioned, that in and of itself deserves a movie. I mean, there was so much on the line. There was so much at stake for both of them, but probably more for the German guy.
yeah.
That in and of it, I mean, if they can do a movie about Max Schmeling and Joe Louis, they could certainly do a movie about this.
Jesse
Yes.
Owens, yes.
Yes, just that part deserves a movie, if you ask me. But it deserves to be well done. And I was hoping this would be it, because 2015 was, 1 year before. This is the 80th year since Jesse Owens won those 4 gold medals in Berlin. And by year 80, it's like, well, it would be nice if there would be like just some amazing movie that we could point to and say, wow. And, you can look at this movie and get a sense of what happened and how glorious and how scary it was. But we don't have that movie yet.
Yeah, and it's like you said, they went to the edge. They brushed over everything, and they mentioned stuff, but they didn't give us details. It wasn't in depth. It was like, it was almost like putting a carrot in front of the horse, and we just couldn't get the carrot. It was too far in front of us, and it just it wasn't it wasn't as good as it could have been, and I was a little disappointed, because I had actually, part of my problem sometimes is I get a little hyped about different films that are coming out, and I have expectations of what I'm about to see. And, sometimes the movies go way, way ahead of my expectations, and I'm totally thrilled and very happy and satisfied at the end of the film. Probably by the middle of the film, I'm extremely happy and satisfied. But, this wasn't that film for me. And I'm a guy who, if you listen to this show and watch this show, I am a big biopic guy. And, because history in my family was a pretty big deal. And so I look forward to these types of films, not just for the theatrical part, but also the education that I can get from it with regard to people in history, people who have done great things, or people who are striving to do better in the real world. So biopics are really important for me. And I was looking forward to this film. I knew about this film when they were first just talking about it coming out. And that's been a long time. And yet I wasn't satisfied. And it made it even harder for me.
Right. And it's almost more disappointing, because it's not a horrible movie. It's just, but it's okay. But okay is almost more of an insult than, because it deserves to be great. Okay is almost more of an insult, like it can be ignored. And it's like, some
people get it right, in some of these biopics that we see. Some people get it right. Some people are, or they're really so close that they're knocking on the door. They're right there. But this movie's like down the road. It's not quite there.
I think Chariots of Fire does. Now there certainly wasn't as much at stake in that outcome or in that story for us as Americans, but it's a compelling story.
There's one thing that I wanted to mention that is a parallel to these Olympic Games in 1936 and the Olympic Games 1924. So we're talking about 12 years?
Yep, just 12 years apart.
12 years apart. And the issues of that Ben Cross's character, Abrams, was having, is similar thing happens in this film. In the 2 American athletes were Jewish.
Yes.
In this film, and it was even worse in this film because of the Nazism they weren't allowed to compete.
Right.
They were there to compete, but they weren't allowed to compete.
Mm-hmm.
And so 12 years later, still just as bad as much worse than it was 12 years prior.
Mm-hmm.
And
Very
it's just a
true.
sad commentary. And it's a sad commentary because things like that continue to occur. And this is 2016. You know, it's just 80 years later. So, with that being said, another crazy thing. Why don't we go to our last movie because we're getting close to that time anyway. The next film is Prefontaine. Now, back in this biopic came out in like I believe 1997,
Yes, it
um,
was 1997.
but it depicts a time um, during the 1972 Olympics where track and field was still very high in the heyday, and distance runners were some of the kings of the road. Um, and we have a middle distance runner and a long distance runner in Prefontaine. Um, here's a guy who was Stephen Prefontaine, who was kind of an eccentric guy, and which was really unusual because he was only like 23, 24 years old to be that young and be very eccentric, very self motivated, self paced, self um, absorbed is probably a very good word, but yet disgustingly talented athlete. So much so that everyone around the world, around the globe, thought that he was going to win anything that he competed in. He had done so well at the University of Oregon in the Big Ten. He had done so well in the nationals. He had done so well in the Olympic trials. And this guy had just was full of life, but he was so into it and so into himself regarding it that he thought he had it made. He thought he was going to win his Olympic gold medal. And 30 yards, 30 meters prior, he just ran out of gas and didn't win a medal. So he was bound and determined, and now not as overbearing as a human being, but now more devoted and more determined to go to the next Olympic Games and win a gold medal. But sadly, his life ended in a car accident and was not able to ever achieve what he was striving for. So this was actually a pretty good movie, I thought. Um, Recent Academy Award winner Jared Leto actually plays Steve, who they call him Prefontaine, in this particular film, and it too has a pretty good cast. Ed O'Neill is a wonderful actor, and he's in this film as well. I mean, there's just you'd be surprised at how many good actors in all these films. Did you get a chance to see this one here?
Yes, I saw it
And what
today.
wow, hey, there you go. And what do you think of the film?
I really liked it, but I'd actually seen the movie quite a while ago. And I really liked it then, and I still liked it today. I thought this actually was a TV movie when I first but then I read about it and I was like, no, this was actually a wide release film. I don't remember it doing well in the box office, and I don't think it did well in the box office, frankly. But it's a very well put together movie. The man who directed this movie, and I want to say his name is, I want to say what his name is.
Stephen James.
Right. Stephen James is an avid runner himself, and he's done a number of movies about the track and field experience. So the love for that permeates this film. The thing that I really like about this film, though, is that it departs from a lot of movies about athletes, especially ones that came out around this time and predated this time, because he really doesn't go to great lengths to make Steve Prefontaine this really likable, kind of like a demigod person. He's not at all perfect. In fact, he's kind of a jerk. He can be kind of a jerk. And that's okay. Frankly, that's the case for a lot of people. Just because they become famous doesn't mean that they're nice. One does not go with the other necessarily. In fact, often they don't even make it into the same room, the nice and the famous part. They're like in whole different rooms. So I like that he did that. The other thing that I think got pointed up in this film, and it really draws quite a contrast. Remember earlier when we were talking about Chariots of Fire, I mentioned these, so many of the men competing were these wealthy men who came from inherited wealth and were very high, to the manner born, very high
Their
upper
class was regal.
Right, upper class men. On the other hand, you've got Steve Prefontaine, who comes from like a kind of a middle class family, and one of the themes of this movie is, what do you do when you're out of college and you're still in your prime? You still want to compete, but the school provides this incredible support system. You don't even realize what the school does for you until you don't have the school anymore. Exactly. So Steve Prefontaine goes to the 1972 Olympics, and at this time, I believe he's a junior in school. He's a junior at the University of Oregon. He goes to the 72 Olympics. He comes in fourth. So it's heartbreaking for him. Comes back, he wins race after race after race in his senior year. He held more records in track and field between 2,000 and 10,000 meters than pretty much any athlete of that time. And those records are just now being broken.
Right.
So he was the real deal. But after he graduates from school, it's like, okay, he wants to go to the 76 Olympics. How is he going to do that? Where are the sponsors? And guess what? They weren't exactly knocking down the doors, because it's not like he won. He came in fourth. So so the sponsors weren't there. There's this great scene where he comes back from Munich, and he comes to the airport to meet his girlfriend, and he kind of says to her out of the corner of his mouth, well, there aren't any reporters here, are there? Because he didn't really want to see any reporters. They weren't there. Nobody came to meet him at the airport. What the fans, because do I need to avoid the fans? No, they probably did. She says they probably didn't know you were coming in. Lies. No, of course, they knew exactly when he was coming in. Nobody was interested because he was a loser. He came in fourth. He was only the fourth best in the world in a race that he should have won. Right. The other thing it was just so tragic what happened. Munich, that situation was just horrific. It was horrific that those terrorists were able to do what they did. And then on top of that, there was all this pressure on these athletes to continue the games. Some of them probably did because, like one of them said in the movie, I've worked my whole life for this. And I know what happened here was tragic, but I may not be able to come back in 4 years. So many times when you compete in the Olympics, it's not like you've got a story 12, you can do it 2 or 3 times and you've got 3 or 4 times to get it right. You get one shot at the Olympics. And if you don't do it, you may not make it back. If you do, you're pretty unique in that regard. So some of those athletes were like, well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I still want to compete. And the way it was portrayed in the movie, Steve Prefontaine was really conflicted. He's like, he said, I don't want to run over the bodies of these dead athletes. I don't want to act like they don't matter. How am I supposed to run under these circumstances? And nobody had a good answer. And in 1972, no one had a good answer. No one knew what to do with this. This was horrific in all the worst ways. The other thing that I really liked that this movie brought out was this disconnect between all this money that flowed into the Olympic machine, you know, the Olympic Committee and the judges and the events and the fundraising, all this money, none of it didn't get to the athletes. So unless you were wealthy, independently wealthy, or you had those coveted sponsorships, and sponsorships in the 70s were something that was just starting, but there wasn't that much of that going on. I mean, they didn't think of that. So you didn't have that. So how were you supposed to make money? Steve Prefontaine was living on food stamps, and he was living in a trailer between 72 and 76. And he said, you know, how am I supposed to do? You have this notion that somehow this just magically happens. It costs money to be an Olympic athlete. It costs money for training. It costs money so that I don't have to do this bartending job where I'm working 3 shifts. So that I can actually take time to train to be this incredible athlete that you want me to be. You all are crazy. And he actually in real life was a pioneer and an advocate for, let's get real about what it means to be an amateur athlete. And just because you're an amateur doesn't mean it doesn't cost money. It costs money. And you all need to come up with some money. This country needs to stop paying lip service to the notion of the glory and the honor of the American flag and start ponying up the way these other countries do. And he actually said all that and suffered for that too. But he did. So it's really, really interesting movie, really incredible young man, not necessarily that likable, you know, but committed, passionate, and, you know, he loved to run. You could see that, you know, and it was just, he just died under such tragic circumstances because he had advocated, he took on the Amateur Athletic Union. He took them on, which was a really ballsy move, and only somebody as arrogant as he would even contemplate that. But he took them on and said, you know, I want the Finnish athletes, because he lost to Finland. He lost to the Finnish athlete, this policeman who beat him. And then there were a couple other people who beat him too. Okay, there were 3 people who beat him. But anyway, he had his eyes on the Finnish guy. And he wanted that guy to come over to the United States. So he took time, money, he got his friends to help him sort of arrange to invite these athletes over for a meet. And the AAU said, well, that's not sanctioned. You know, we don't think you should be doing that. And Steve Prefontaine was like, wait a minute, you know, back off. You know, this is crazy. What is wrong with having them come over here? Well, you know, it could affect this, that, and the other thing. Well, no, it won't affect anything. So I suggest you back off. And they actually did. They actually decided to sanction the meet against all that made common sense in those days. And Steve Prefontaine got a lot of his Olympic athlete friends to compete. And they were like, well, we don't know, because if the meet's not sanctioned, we won't be able to compete in Montreal in 1976. And if we are going to do that, and now the pressure is really on to compete in 1976 because 72 was ruined. Thank you, terrorists. But 72 was just ruined. So these young men who didn't get to do their best, or maybe didn't even get to compete in Munich, even though they were there, were duty bound and determined to compete in 1976 in Montreal. So a lot of interesting conflicts and themes and a lot of issues brought up about the plight of American athletes. I don't know that American athletes have quite as much to go through, but there is still that constant sort of battle between how do I manage how do I keep training? How do I put resources into training and, I don't know, live? I don't know, have money to live on, have a roof over my head, keep my family going, and all this other stuff. Because we still don't have an infrastructure, a governmental infrastructure that supports athletes outside of universities. We still don't have that in this country, and in other countries they do.
That's very true.
Apparently this struck a nerve because I've gone on for quite a while about this.
I think in the United States, and again, I can't speak for other countries, but the United States as a whole, capitalism, for its good things and bad things, one of the good things is there are lots of sponsors out there that can sponsor someone, somebody, some group, some team. But still, you have to convince them to do it. And that's not, and there goes it being easy. But the infusion of professional athletes into the Olympic Games has made it a little bit easier on some fronts, as far as getting sponsorship and monies attached to the situation. And the Olympic Committee has done their due diligence in trying to continue to make that possible here in the United States. But again, you've got to have a lot of sponsors throughout the rest of the year in order to maintain your consistency and your ability and your continued training, your journey into those major competitions. And it is not easy. I was never quite that good an athlete, but I know the plight of other athletes who I knew that were as good or better. Actually, an acquaintance of mine back when I was in high school actually made it to the Olympics. So I know what he had to go through. And he came from a much lesser place than a lot of his peers. And yet now he's Olympic gold medalist and a college track coach, actually in the state that I live in here in Indiana. So, you can come from nothing and make something of yourself with regard to just doing something that you love. In this case, your athletic prowess, doing something that you love to do, your passion in that. And so, I guess the whole thing is to say, if you've got a passion for something, continue to try to achieve it. You never know. But yeah, it's been an interesting all these years from the 1920s all the way to the 2000s with regard to athletics and these movies. And there's so many movies out there that talk about the athletic journey. And I think you should take an opportunity to see some of them. Any other movies that you came across that you like, Karen? Again, we can't talk about them all, but maybe you can throw a few more out there if you know any. One I like, which really is not the Olympic experience, but it is an experience coming from nothing to make something of yourselves and using athletics. I like this movie, McFarland, USA. They're not Olympic athletes, but they went from sharecropper families to being some of the best runners in the country.
Well, I like Glory Road. That's one movie that comes to mind about these the first African American team that played in NCAA championships, I think.
Wow.
So biopic, fact-based movie, well done, I think. One of the director for Prefontaine worked on Hoop Dreams, which is a documentary about. So that same director worked on that. So, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, there are a lot of. I mean, it's not that hard a leap to make movies about athletes because you've got, in spite of where you are economically, there's always a struggle. There's always a human struggle connected with being an elite athlete because it's about winning and it's about being the best in the city, the state, the country, the world. And that's not an easy path. It's very rare that somebody can just sort of show up full cloth and just kind of do it. It's always a story of sacrifice. And even if it seems that that's the case, all of these athletes make tremendous sacrifices to be in the Olympic Games. So those sorts of sacrifices can definitely be the stuff of interest with regard to movies, because they're the types of sacrifices that most people are not called upon to make, so yeah. And I think it's good that we got a chance to talk about it. We're smack dab in the middle of the Olympics. Last week was gymnastics week, and it was gymnastics and swimming mostly. And now we're shifting away from gymnastics. I think that's going to end towards this weekend, and then we're going to move full-throated into track and field events, pole vaulting and the heptathlon and the decathlon and discus throwing and all kinds of things. And it'll be really interesting to watch.
And who was your favorite discus thrower growing up?
Who's what?
Your favorite discus thrower growing up?
Oh, his name is Blair.
Well, yes, it is. Yes, I threw discus in high school and in college, actually. So, very, very fun event.
I'm not athletic at all. I was the dancer. I was never an athlete.
But that's athletic.
No, it's not.
A lot of people think that dancers are athletic.
They might be athletic, but it's not a sport.
No, it's not a sport. It's an art form. But me throwing discus was an art form because I wasn't.
No, that was a sport.
I wasn't good enough to make it a sport because I wasn't that good. I was okay. Got a trophy here and there. No, not really. I just enjoyed doing it. It was a lot of fun. One of the best things about competing athletically, because I played football in high school and college, and I threw discus in high school and college, and I even wrestled in high school. It was the camaraderie, the people that you meet. As I alluded to, I met a guy at a track meet, and we were just rooting on our teams, and we just happened to be from the same city. At the time, we were at a major track meet in the central part of the state, and we just happened to be from the same city, so we kind of gravitated to each other, supported each other during our events. He was an elite athlete, and I was just a guy that was at the meet. but you continue to root for these people, and especially when you see talent, you know that someone needs to pay attention. So out there, people who are listening to the show, watching the show, if you know someone's talented, even if you can't monetarily assist them, keep talking to them, keep them motivated, because that talent can take them places, across the world, travel across the world. It's a great thing. So there's all kind of talent, athletic, mental, educational talent. Just keep supporting people, and maybe one day we can have a better place. Okay, I'm getting sappy. That's our show, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us here on A Real Point of View. During this Olympic time, support the Olympic athletes. Watch them on television. Root them on. Somehow in the cosmos, they can feel you doing it. So, thank you again for watching us here on A Real Point of View. And join us next time, and we'll have some more interesting films to talk about, and situations, and have a little bit more fun, and just talking about film. Thanks again for watching. Any last words before we get out of here, Karen?
Watch the Olympics and go to the movies. And
That's a
thanks for joining us too.
That's a win-win.
Yeah, right.
All right. Take care, everybody. We're out of here. Good night.